Thank you.
So thank you for joining us, everyone. And I've just given the introduction to the New Economy Network Australia. And if you don't know about us, please visit the website, neweconomy.org.au. But I'm now very pleased to hand over to Anna, who will address our topic for this evening. What does degrowth look like in our post-COVID economic slowdown? Where to from here? Thank you, Anna. Over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Yep. So thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here and to have this opportunity to talk about degrowth and to learn from you, Anitra, Michelle, and from all of you on the context in Australia. I have to say very briefly that in the last days I've been feeling quite overwhelmed with the situation in the US, the police violence and so on, and that was really, I was struggling with it while I was like also trying to focus on this hopeful presentation, and it just, I think for me, shows that there are, you know, still all these systems of oppression that we really have to dismantle. Yeah, so I just leave it at that. So I'm a PhD on consumption, on how to change and reduce consumption at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And I'm also a co-founder of the Dutch Degrowth platform, which we started in 2018, Ontgroei, that's the name. And also I'm part of the Degrowth International activist group that is promoting the Global Degrowth Day. So I'm mainly going to talk to you today about what is degrowth. For me, degrowth has these two streams. It is, on one hand, like a really strong critique of growth. And on the other hand, it is this search for, you know, okay, now we criticize it really well, but then what should we do otherwise, right? So it is this really search for practices and alternatives for all the systems and lifestyles and arrangements and so on. So Pluriverse is from a book, also really interesting book that I think it's for free online, you can find it, of all sorts of alternative ways of imagining a society that is not based on economic growth. So in this presentation, I'll mainly focus on this critique of growth, and I think Anitra will focus more on the other aspects of like the alternative. So what is wrong with growth? I have now like 4 slides. They are inspired very much by Barbara Muraka's presentation at the first Utrecht symposium. You can find that presentation online at Ontgroei's like YouTube and website. Barbara Muraka is one of the main degrowth scholars. And so the first thing that is wrong with growth is that, you know, economic growth is not just about some digital numbers increasing, right? The economy growing is related with material extraction and energy and resource use for that extraction and transportation and production and use and disposal and so on. And on the right side, you see here this picture from a study called The Great Acceleration, where you see, you know, all this increase in uses of resources for services and so on since the mid-18th century. So we see that all this increasing use of resources and energy has also effects on emissions. So growth is very much material and is impacting our ecosystems and the climate and putting all of us in danger. The second aspect of what is wrong with growth is that, you know, this idea of monetary growth, so GDP, while we are all like obsessed with it, GDP actually just means, you know, economic transactions. So it doesn't express the well-being of a society in itself. And there have been more and more indexes that trying to compare countries based on indicators that are not, you know, just economic transactions. One of them was the Happy Planet Index. I think they are not going on anymore, but they did it for a few years, and they were measuring life expectancy, ecological footprint, and inequality and satisfaction with life. And based on that index, Costa Rica was winning that index around the world for like 3 years. And I found something really interesting there was that also in other studies, so Costa Rica had this really high rate in this index, but has a way lower GDP than the US, but a higher life expectancy, and I think 1/3 of the ecological footprint. Something also interesting was that another study found that in Costa Rica, the area that had the highest life expectancy was the poorest region of Costa Rica, which was this Nicoya Peninsula. I put some pictures of, of that here, which I found is very interesting. We could go more into that in the discussion. The third aspect is that growth is not only this material or monetary aspect, but it's also a cultural and a social process, right? Growth is this mental infrastructure, we can think about it like that. And it's about keeping on investing, on competing. We have to always do more and better and be more productive, right? Personally, but also as a society. And this competition is also motivating and motivated by individualism. So at the personal level, you have these dynamics of more and more stress, anxiety, burnouts, loneliness, and so on. And at the societal level, this fixation on more and better and more production and this imagination of development and progress as requiring just always this one way of like more production and consumption and more infrastructure is like blinding us completely to the possibility of alternatives of, you know, how could we imagine a world that is better, but it's not about producing more and consuming more. So that brings us to the fourth point, which is growth is a structural condition for our economies. So we are not only locked in mentally in this, but also very much structurally. So growth is seen as the only way to secure and improve living standards and social stability. And we know that, you know, our financial systems, our businesses, our governments are all dependent on economic growth. So that's what we see now also with the pandemic, that when growth is not happening, you have a problem. And we watched it happen about 10 years ago with the last recession. So our system is so dependent on growth that when it doesn't happen, you have huge, you know, unemployment and so on. So we are forced to keep on growing, not to have that. So on one hand, you have this system that it's a bit, you are like in this accelerating bicycle that cannot stop. And also we have this explanation or this reasoning that we need growth, we need it to reduce poverty, right? To reduce inequalities. But then if we look at that, we see that actually wealth has been increasing, but it mainly goes to the top. So while we talk about that, oh, we have to keep growing the pie, otherwise, you know, people are still really poor in many countries, and even, you know, in the rest of the world anyway. So, but actually, we see the wealth is growing, but it goes to the top. And here you see this little message from Oxfam about the, you know, 2,000 billionaires own more wealth than 60% of the world population. And we know that billionaires are increasing. They are having a huge amount of growth, and especially even more in this pandemic. So let's go, taking into account all these issues, what is degrowth? So here I have like two degrowth definitions, let's say. So one from Barbara Muraca, who says that degrowth is not a reversal of what we have right now. It's not about just shrinking and less. Degrowth is a radical change of the structure of society. And then I have another definition that I assembled from a few others that says, degrowth is a process of political and social transformation which downscales production and consumption, reducing society's material and energy use, while at the same time improving the quality of life and enhancing equity and ecological conditions on the planet. So then we could go into degrowth policies and practices, and I hope we go into that in the discussion. Regarding, degrowth and COVID, I think, so these are my impressions. So from the start, you had, of course, reports of, people stocking up in supermarkets, but you also had lots of reports of spontaneous actions of caring for strangers, right? There are lots of notes of people that posted that in their buildings offering help to their neighbors and people volunteering a lot in all kinds of services. So I think that shows that we are not just inherently competitive, like we have been accustomed to hear that we are, but caring for others and being social is very much part of human nature in terms of how we have evolved in groups and so on. And the other thing is that the crisis has shown how priorities can change so fast if there is political willingness for that. So from night to day, the economies were shut down to save lives. And you could also see that in that period, which professions are really the ones we depend on, right? And it was care, and it's about food, and it's about cleaners, and so on. So I think that's really important, that also for what we are facing next with the climate crisis, is that we know we have to take harsh measures and transform our economies completely. And for a long time we've been told that, but that's harder, and we cannot do it that fast. And from night to day we could see how it was done. But then we also see that we know, because we are a society dependent on growth structurally, that when that doesn't happen, you have mass unemployment, right? We have this huge disruption. So this is an important time to make these tough choices of how are we going to make our society less dependent on growth, but dependent, on the things that we really need for well-being of, each and every one of us, for justice, for equality, and for, to stop exploiting and polluting planets and ecosystems and so on. So you have this, we are a sort of a crossroads. And I think from a degrowth perspective, so from a degrowth movement perspective, but my own, is that it's really important on one hand to keep telling people about this idea of degrowth, because it's like, okay, let's dare to imagine something else. I think that for me, that's the strongest point of degrowth. So it's this tough critique, but also that it's like it breaks the status quo, that there is no alternative to this idea of progress that at the same time is undermining our future. So degrowth has that strength. But at the same time, I think we have to make it more and more concrete, so that we engage more and more in all sorts of sectors, at all regions, and try to see, okay, what would degrowth mean in practice for health, or for the agricultural system, or for this local government, or for that businesses. So I think we have to really engage more and more, and making these concrete approaches and see, okay, what would we need in practice to be liberated from economic growth. And for that, I think it's really important to have in mind this sentence I like very much from Florence Kennedy, who was a black activist from the US, who said, "Don't agonize, organize." And related to that, so in the past year and a half, I've been involved in these groups. So the first is Degrowth International activist group, who's organizing the Global Degrowth Day. And a friend from mine there, Anna Sanger, is also here. Maybe she would also like to say some words later on. And we are just a group of people from all over, at this point, all over Europe, but people are also contacting us from all over the world, like Australia, to organize events on degrowth, and also start triggering these discussions in their own countries and communities and so on. Because we are in touch, with people who are organizing degrowth events all over the world, we end up being also a bit of a network of this degrowth-minded people around the world. And then we also started with a few people who were in the last, well, the Degrowth Conference of 2018 in Malmo. In one session, we figured out, oh, you're also in the Netherlands, you're also in the Netherlands. A few of us were from the Netherlands there, and we were like, we have to bring degrowth to the Netherlands, we have to do something there. So we went back to the Netherlands and started this Dutch degrowth platform. And we've organized now 2 symposiums, promoting it among people of many, different sectors to really bring this idea and this discussion there. And this is what, has been going on, and it's quite nice. So I end now my presentation with this quote from Wackernagel and Rees, which says, "The politically acceptable is ecologically disastrous, while the ecologically necessary is politically impossible." So
thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
I was actually looking for Anna Sanger to see if she did want to make just a couple of comments since you've introduced, but I can't find her. Is she still on the call?
Here, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hello.
Hello, Anna.
I was waving a few times, but too many people to. But don't worry. Yeah, thank you, Anna, for this very, very nice presentation. And I'm really happy that you could do it today. And yes, I just want to say a couple of words that I'm so happy about our very new connection with NENA. The organization that I found just looking for partners for our Global Degrowth Day, since we cannot really organize so many events ourselves all over the world. We are a small team, actually, about 5 to 8 active people and a little bit bigger mailing list. So I was really happy to find NENA and to see, wow, there's an organization in Australia. They do a lot, they have a lot of ideas that are really degrowth-like, and they seem to be very nice, organized, and actually you're already doing the things that the degrowth movement is establishing, hopefully right now, to work in different sectors and really try to improve social and political and economic life, and all the corners that are necessary for our social life. So yes, this what I wanted to say, and also that you take part in the Global Degrowth Day, which is really nice. This year, of course, we are facing difficult times because in most of the countries, the kinds of events that we were having in mind and that were taking place in the last years, like picnics and biking tours and concerts and seeing a movie together and discussions, that is difficult, of course. And we were forced to find different ways to still make it happen. So I'm really happy that there are new connections arising, and we still can meet, and it's also an opportunity to make it a little bit more international, and that so many people from around the world are taking place today. Makes me really happy. So this is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much, Michelle, for organizing this.
No problem. And I also want to acknowledge Mark Bremner, who's been helping me keep in touch with some of our friends and new friends around the world. So thank you, Anna. And so if folks here are interested in seeing what other people around the world are doing for Global Degrowth Day, is it best to just visit the website? I think Anna has.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can visit the website on degrowth.info, and there's a section about the Global Degrowth Day, so you can see the events of this year so far that have registered. And actually, it's not only taking events part on our organized events on this day, but it's through June and July and through the whole summer that there are different events virtually and also offline events. So yeah, the best way is to visit this website, and there you can still participate because we have 3 days left. And if you feel like, oh, I can organize something small, even if it's just a small meeting with some people, a discussion group, or I want to show a movie and the restrictions are allowing it in my country right now, so there's still time to do something, and you can register your event in a map, and on this map you'll see all the different events of the Global Degrowth Day, but you can also see all the degrowth realities in the world. So this map is growing right now and was established just a few days ago, before we had a different one. So feel free to visit the website degrowth.info and participate or inform yourself and get familiar with the movement. And yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anna and Anna. And for everyone who can see the chat box, Anna has put in the Global Degrowth Day website. And if you would, Anna would like to put in anyone's email address there in case folks would like to directly connect, that might be lovely. But yeah, our little webinar tonight is in place of, probably we would have in a former life encouraged you all to get together in a non-growing fashion in terms of fossil fuels, get together at a cafe or something and chat about these important issues. So thank you so much. And now it's my great delight to introduce Anitra Nelson, who is involved in so many things. I'm going to let her introduce herself, but I've been very impressed with watching all the writing and the work she's done on degrowth in particular sectors. So over to you, Anitra, to share with us tonight.
So I'll just try and share my screen.
Yes. Which is wonderful. I love it when technology works.
There we are. So yes, I'm affiliated with the Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute at University of Melbourne. That's an honorary position, and I'm semi-retired now, but even when I was of working age, I worked part-time, and that's all grist for the mill when it comes to degrowth and change. I thought that because we're talking here in Australia, and because we have in the Exploring Degrowth book, which I've just written with Vincent Léger, who's a French man who lives in Hungary, in Budapest, and our book will be out in August by a London publisher, Pluto. We've got 2 cartoons here from Loonig, a very well-known Australian cartoonist, who really encapsulates there some of the differences between growth and non-growth or degrowth or post-growth. We're moving from faster, higher and stronger to slower, deeper and wiser. So yeah, Anna's very well introduced degrowth as it's a missile word, it's a provocation aiming to decrease people's material and energy use, and also, and most importantly, decrease the economic, social and political inequities between us all. And the main aim is that we go to a baseline of meeting everyone's basic needs, which means lifting many people in the world up. And I think one of the most important concepts for me in degrowth is open relocalization, meaning that what we're working towards are very strong local economies where local people produce their own basic needs and have a lot of political autonomy around governing how they produce and what they produce. They have a strong culture, celebratory culture. It's an open relocalization. So we're not looking at sort of like protectionist measures around localization, but being very open and global in the way that we network. Another Loonig cartoon here underscoring that degrowth is about achieving happiness, and a happiness that is derived just from very ordinary, everyday kinds of things that we do, like 3 minutes of happiness borrowed from a dog, or diffuse residual happiness resulting from rhythmic domestic tasks such as washing the dishes. So degrowth really departs from a lot of the other kinds of sustainability paradigms that are into smart technologies and trying to twist and turn within capitalism with various reforms, and bringing in the Green New Deal kind of pretty much fits into this kind of paradigm. Is degrowth is very focused on the fact that what we're looking at is a very sharp decline in material and energy use, so that we can in fact fit within the limits of Earth. I started to learn about degrowth about 10 years ago, and I was lucky enough when I was a visiting scholar at the New School for in the economic department, the New School for Social Research economic department, which is in New York City, to be able to take a train ride up to Montreal to be part of the first international conference of the Americas that was held in a very kind of illustrative way of what degrowth is about. It was like a pop-up conference on different campuses. And it was held at the time that students in Quebec had a rise in fees that they found really intolerable, and they'd left their universities. They were on a rolling strike, and they had these protests, these street protests, which went 24 hours a day. And at the end of the conference days, at around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we'd look up on the computer where the march was within Montreal, and we'd join it. So it was a very lively kind of conference, and degrowth is very practical as well as talking and discussing and theorizing about things. It's very much on the ground and very much about doing things. So I mentioned before that I've pretty much had a policy of only working part-time, because I think that one of the things that really limits people is that if you work full-time, you usually take a couple of days, the other couple of days of the week, off to sort of rejuvenate and get ready for the next 5 days. And after having done that early in my life, I pretty much decided that I would try and work just to satisfy my basic needs. And that was long before I found out about degrowth. But as an activist at that stage, I found that if I were to be doing the kinds of things that I felt passionate about, then I needed to kind of like move beyond ordinary paid work. So yeah, this is the book that Vincent and I have been writing. It's very much how it's different from some other degrowth books that you would find is that it's very much focused on the politics of degrowth. It's very much focused on degrowth as a movement, where we've been, where we came from, and where we might go. So probably one of the most interesting chapters is chapter 3, which is degrowth in practice. And in terms of the holistic movement, I think it's really important to emphasize that it's decentralized, it's multi-layered, it's an open network. And as we mentioned before, this is the main kind of hub of degrowth is to go to this website, and a lot of the main things that are happening in degrowth will be promoted there. So in the 3rd chapter of our book, what we look at are 4 spheres of action, and this is a kind of a way to try and analytically categorize the various different ways that degrowth activism occurs. And the first kind of activism is people adopting frugal abundance, sometimes known, especially across other movements, as voluntary simplicity, self-provisioning using permaculture or agroecology as techniques, just doing gardening, conviviality, in other words, really enjoying getting together with other people to prepare and eat food. As I said before, cutting down and out of work, and decreasing our material and energy use just in our everyday tasks, so that we're learning about doing things differently in ways that are going to mean that we're living within Earth's limits. Of course, that working as a household like that is quite a challenge, but if we get together with other people, we find that we get a lot of extra energy and we're able to delegate tasks between one another. And so I think one of the most exciting areas of the way that degrowth has operated in the last 10 years is that there are now numbers of centres and what we call formations where there are different sorts of activities, degrowth activities, that are connecting with one another in local areas. So it might be food co-ops and food markets that are running on degrowth principles. There's consumption cooperatives, connecting with agricultural, community-supported agriculture, but not only that, actually having connections with makers spaces where they can actually be operating on digital platforms that are useful and easy for them to use, so that these are all creating networks which are not like separate activities, but properly networked and help us be able to see that, as Anna raised, a new economy, a new world, another world is possible. However, these collective and individual activities need to be matched by resistance. There are many of us who actually can't choose and don't have the luxury, like I did, of working part-time or whatever. We need to be working towards enabling people to have shorter working weeks. And we do that as a big resistance and systemic kind of movement. We're also looking at things like advertising. Degrowth itself actually became visible as a movement with Adbusters. Also fighting the big mega infrastructures, because while we're doing really constructive things, and capitalism is growing and growing and growing, we actually need to be targeting those massive and really dangerous and destructive aspects of capitalism. Joining with other groups, the groups that are working for environmental justice, Indigenous peoples who are suffering from mining on their own land and stuff like that. So a lot of that involves campaigning with other movements. And there's a very good book that's just come out, and it's called Degrowth in Movements. And that one there's about 6 books out this year, which are all looking at different aspects of degrowth. And what's good about degrowth in movements, and you can see some more about it at the degrowth.info site, is that it shows how the engagement between degrowth and other movements is extremely strong. And we benefit a lot from our discussions and actions with other groups, like food sovereignty movement, alter globalization, a whole range of movements. And I suppose that gets us to the final area of degrowth, and that is not just theorizing about, but strategizing about the agenda for degrowth, the project of degrowth. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. In our book, we unpack and sketch a French proposal for degrowth, which is around an unconditional autonomy allowance, which is multidimensional, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But here we are. This is Camp de Crèche in Sébéret in France, and one of the founders of this degrowth centre, Francois Schneider, co-edited the book that I edited, called Housing for Degrowth. In that book, we've got a chapter by Hans Widmer, who's also known as PM, and it's looking at a quite kind of utopian or theoretical degrowth project. And here's a sketch of what he elaborates in his chapter. And it's really looking, he's tried to make the different aspects of this courtyard conglomeration of people all dwelling and working in a multi-story complex. He's tried to make it look as if it's borrowing from all different kinds of cultures. And again, this is what open relocalization is about. It's about us recognizing all the different cultures that we've come from and holding on to the best of them and sharing them with other people. And you can see all of the productive activities that are all happening around here. And in Hans Widmer's chapter, it's very much a kind of a city settlement, but blending back and leaning on a very close hinterland of agriculture. Not a proper hinterland, it's properly decentralized cities. So yeah, that's a chapter in this book that talks about other things, such as up here in the right-hand corner, you can see a photo of Common Ground, which is in central Victoria. Quite a lot of the work that I've done and some of my living activism during the 1990s, I lived in 2 different forms of eco-collaborative housing. And one of the reasons why we emphasize eco-collaborative housing in as housing for degrowth is that where we're sharing space together, we can often be economizing on space. And right at the moment, I'm part of a women's group in central Victoria who are establishing co-housing in Daylesford and trying to minimise the kinds of space, the kinds of footprints that we have, the amount of parking and all those kinds of things. We've got a chapter on tiny houses and a range of other sorts of initiatives, including squatting and social housing that involves co-housing, looking at Christiania. And let me just move on here. After we'd done the book, we went on a tour. We did 27 events in 11 countries, and we did it all by train or ferry. And Francois had his bike, but I preferred to use my legs. And we used to have arguments. I used to say, well, I'm better than you because I use my legs, because he used to always think that he was very good for using his bike. I mention this partly because today is World Bicycle Day, and because degrowth people are very conscious of the ways that we need to be lighter in terms of our footprint, in terms of transport. So I also thought it was important to mention this tour because it shows that where we see ourselves not just as scholars, Francois has an engineering background, I'm in the social sciences, but we also do all of this as activists. And this tour was very much a blend. There was probably fewer events that we did in academic institutions and many more public ones in social centres and various public spaces and activist spaces. However, one of those activities that we did was at the European Union, where there was a 2-day conference, a post-growth conference, which brought together many degrowth people with bureaucrats and politicians at the European Union. And Francois and my message in terms of representing the contributors to the Housing for Degrowth book was that what we really need are enabling mechanisms. I think many people have experienced trying to build, or in Australia, for instance, it's very hard to do tiny houses or co-housing because they're models that don't fit easily into planners and building regulations and all of that kind of thing. And so, although many of us working at the grassroots think that we're going to get further by working at the grassroots, there are things that we can demand, governments that we have at the moment, which could actually release a lot more energy at the ground level. In Australia, where we have problems, big problems in terms of housing and costs, this is a really massive thing, and one of the things that I do in my local area. So we're doing a follow-on book that's called Food for Degrowth. I'm doing that with another Australian, but Fern is actually based in Barcelona. One of the chapters is written by Patrick Jones and his partner Meg Ullman. And Patrick lives in central Victoria, like me, in Daylesford. And here he is with a poster on degrowth, and he's part of one of the big climate marches that we had about 6 months ago. So you can just see here that we've got 17 chapters with lots of different kinds of things, and it's pretty well divided into clusters of chapters on those different aspects that I went through in the different 4 categories. Perhaps one of the most important things to recognise here is that there are numbers of chapters that are written by people in Central and Eastern Europe, and they draw a lot on the extension of traditional practices, especially, say, in food self-provisioning. And you can see that the 4th chapter there is on Kenya, and it's on women who live in the capital of Kenya, in Nairobi, but who maintain strong links with their rural roots and manage to keep, and they also do gardening, and they keep up using some of their traditional vegetables, and they get together in households collectively and continue the preparation of the kinds of foods, leafy green vegetables, that the commercial farmers and the commercial supermarkets see as being too difficult because they go bad quickly. And what we're learning, and it's the same with the Housing for Degrowth, is that there's much in the Global South where Global South people can teach us various things about what they're doing to resist neo-colonization through capitalist practices.
Anitra, I'm just wondering how you're going for time.
Yep, I can stop more or less any time.
Well, it's not about stopping. I think you were the one who suggested shorter talks so we can have more conversation. So it's been more than 20 minutes now. So
okay then.
Yep.
Why don't I just, yeah. So I'll just move through this extremely quickly. So I've mentioned that degrowth is about cultural revolution. It's about quality and use values. And just to mention about the unconditional autonomy allowance that I spoke about before, we're looking at basic needs and services being met. And it's not just a basic income in terms of money, but basic needs and services being met in kind. Maximum incomes. Those are the kinds of things I'm involved with in my local area. I'm just not going to talk much about that. And the last slide is about Degrowth Futures. We're looking at talking about degrowth like we are now, questioning it, doing it, experimenting with it, and growing it.
And having cats sit in pots and do it.
Stop sharing right now.
Thanks, Anitra. And I really hate rushing people. I love to hear whatever.
No. I knew that you'd give me notice. So there we are. I was already.
It's harder to be polite in Zoom. In the real, you can hold up a sign. But thank you so much, Anitra. Although I don't want to have a death by PowerPoint evening, I do just want to share a couple of thoughts. I mentioned in the blurb that I would also speak to some of the legal aspects, and Anitra, some of your slides really raise this whole point of we need to support the kinds of mechanisms and measures that would help create a systems change and support degrowth. And it was funny, I had originally invited Sam Alexander to be a third speaker. When he couldn't join us, I thought, oh, hang on, I did a PhD related to this. Maybe I should share. So forgive me, normally I'm a facilitator, but I thought I'd share a few things. I finished my PhD at the end of 2014, and I actually went into some very in-depth regulatory analysis of, it was framed as reducing resource consumption, but of course all the literature connected with degrowth. And I looked particularly at individuals and households for various reasons, just academic really, to try to look at the kind of what neoliberalism would assume is the last bastion of private property rights and an untouchable space. But what we found through the research I was doing is that not only are individuals highly regulated in a capitalism structure, whether it's from your own driver's license to child welfare to a whole bunch of other things. There was also in Australia just a number of positive examples of where laws and all of the connecting points for regulation had helped support a decrease in whatever it was we were taking. I'm not going to talk about those particular examples. Back in the day, the South Australian plastic bag ban was one of the most important examples of a very near perfect regulatory structure that created a decreased production, consumption and demand for things like plastic bags. That was very successful. I cannot speak to the same success in Queensland, but that's another matter. Throughout all the stuff I looked at, what we found was exactly what Anitra had said. There was an awful lot you can do independently, and certainly all the work I do today with AILA and NENA is built within a civil society grassroots approach. But where you have political will and where you have bureaucrats committed to a pathway and continuing, the power of a legal structure or a regulatory framework is extreme. It basically means that you've got not only the collective power of so-called democracy, you've also got the military might of the police force and the backup of what in legal theories is an important element of Western law, which is enforcement. But what we found through the positive case studies is with a policy framework and people understanding why something had to be reduced, people embraced it. They didn't reject it. There was quite a phenomenal, whether it was the water restrictions, plastic bags, even the fishing, which if anyone on this call is a recreational fisher person, you will understand this is a phenomenally powerful tribe and a tribe of people who protect their interests and their consumption and activities, but even they are profoundly aware that you must manage your resources, or in my case, the fish community. And there was a lot of other wonderful findings through there, and regulation, good modern regulation connects also to behavioral psychology. But what am I talking about in terms of, well, what kinds of legal structures do we need? Well, Anitra has touched on them with housing and also with food, but just to rattle off a couple of examples, things that seem almost unimaginable are definitely possible, and in fact are through regulatory approaches rejected and not supported at the moment. So reducing car traffic, increasing public transport, increasing public spaces, facilitating downshifting, regulating the reduction of reduced work hours, but also ensuring a livable wage, a universal basic income. All of these bits and pieces connect to degrowth. In Sam Alexander's work, one of his excellent articles talked about the barriers to degrowth. And a lot of them were the sheer machinations and structures that we're born into in a modern Western society. If I work less and I earn less, I can't afford a house because they cost a lot. If I don't have a car and I live in suburbs where there's no public transport, I can't get around. So I have to have a job, to have a car, to go to the park, to play with my kids. So the whole interconnected fabric of really positive and incredibly effective things that can be done through the regulatory structure. And regulation in its modern form is not just law, command and control, bang over the head. It's how do you communicate to the general public that this big transition, this big change needs to happen. And then throughout all my research, it was just heartbreaking to see how effective we could be if we had governments that were interested in addressing climate change effectively, in degrowing a whole bunch of everything from fossil fuels to other resource use. And Anitra's already touched on advertising. There is an incredibly important role for law to reduce advertising. And in the UK and other places, there's been huge debates and pretty good progress in some pockets about, for example, reducing advertising of junk food in children's TV spaces, and also trying to reduce advertising around kids' toys and other such things, taking pressure off parents. But this little cartoon tells you everything you need to know about advertising. Of course, nobody needs one. That's why I called in the advertising people. And a lot of my work on consumption, I always tell people about this one article that's awesome to read called The Gospel of Consumption by Jeff Franklin. And it's available online for free in Orion magazine. And he talks about the advent after the Second World War of this deliberate creation of the consumer society by large corporations. And he shows in that article, it's one of the greatest examples of the path we did take, but the path that could have been taken, a corporation that did in fact support less work hours and a greater downshifting for its people. And the lovely stories people said, when they became part-time, they joined community, they made jam, they had time, they did good things. This was back in the 40s, 50s. And I like to end my quick blurb on law and the power of law and regulating everything from positive incentives to negative incentives through taxation, rates, all manner of ways you can control activity. Greatest reminder for people in the West, particularly, who think there are no limits and we shouldn't have limits, is that when we see great need, the Second World War is a great example of rationing that took place, then governments step up. And we've seen this. And to link it back to the theme tonight, what COVID has shown us is, number one, we can live with less air travel, less local travel, local food. We can see giant changes in society quickly. And if we could address climate change and the ecological crisis that we face, as quickly as we did with COVID, and we could. There are ways to do it. The world slowed down, but other than the poor people who got very sick, the world has not ended with people staying home and not flying around the globe or doing all manner of things that are costing the earth. So that's where I'll end my talk. About the only other thing that I will do is just give a plug. The work that the Australian Earth Laws Alliance does through a program called Green Prints, which is a play on the word of blueprints, is this idea that at a societal level, it's a complex approach to create systems change to grow. But we've been working through a methodology with some pilot communities to show literally at a large scale, large landscape scale, how we can harness all of the awesome tools out there to understand local ecology and local ecological limits, to then understand land use and what's been going on in that place and all of the consumption, production, housing settlements, everything. And then understand how we might shift from that to a much more sustainable, sure, but also a degrown space where people are happier with more time, but still have an economy and still have these strong local ways of working and being. So Green Prints is something that we're passionate about, and it brings in all the best stuff that we can find, all these other tools. And probably one last reminder is that degrowth itself isn't the end game. Otherwise we would shrink and disappear. We don't want to continue degrowing until there is nothing left for us to be. As Hayden Washington in the Center for a Steady State Economy group says, it's degrowing particularly over-consuming societies so that we can reach a point where we are living within our limits and we are being good Earth citizens and contributing to the reduction of excess inside our global commons. So many things to think about. But that's all I wanted to say with my quick reminder that number one, I used to be a lawyer type, and number two, our collective and legal responses can play a very important role. But for many of us, particularly since 2012 in Australia, we have not looked to lawmaking or regulations as a solution to many of our problems because our governments are unwilling to step into a space that challenges the growth paradigm. So there we are. So we would like to have some questions for anyone who has the mental stamina to keep going for another 15 minutes or more. I think we had advertised this to 8:30. I've been looking at all the chats and there's been some lovely comments, so thank you for that. I'm just looking for actual questions. There's been a lot more come in while I chatted, so here we go. Kerry Willis has said, are degrowth proponents working together with the Wellbeing Economy people? Yes, they are, absolutely. The Wellbeing Economy Alliance, Robert Costanza, when he came to the NENA conference in 2017, was talking about the building of this Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and then it took off in 2018. I suspect if NENA was being created today, we would call it Wellbeing Economy Alliance. You never know, down the track we may change its name, who knows. But NENA is certainly connected to Wellbeing Economy Alliance and degrowth people in that space. Donut economics is very much about living within limits and downshifting. I can't speak for Anna and Anna in their work with the Global Degrowth Group, but I know that the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and folks like us are all connected around some of that stuff. Anna, did either of you have any thoughts on your relationship with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance or any of other groups?
Yeah, personally, I did not, but I did not engage. But yeah, but that's something that people also keep telling. So I think people that are drawn to this are also drawn to well-being economy. So we find, I mean, the same in activist circles where you keep finding the same people, you know, in related causes. Maybe I have a feeling maybe in the well-being economy, and also the same with Kate Rowers in Donuts Economics, they probably find degrowth as a concept quite aligned, but maybe not as the word. Because I had a feeling Kate Rowers with, like she had a public discussion with Giorgio Callis, who is like a degrowth scholar some years ago. It's like, you can find it in the internet. And she was saying that, we cannot use that word because it's negative, and people will be like, you need something more appealing. And then you get the people from degrowth saying, okay, but then it can be co-opted very easily, like the
Yeah.
word sustainable, right?
Yep.
Sustainable aviation, sustainable coal,
Yep.
or whatever.
Yep.
So I think we are aligned most likely, but then with different, slightly different approaches.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I've had, perhaps Anitra has too, many conversations where people don't want to use degrowth because they feel like it's waving a red flag at capitalism, come and charge, whereas some of us like using it because it cannot be appropriated into something else. Degrowth cannot be buttered up and turned into something fabulous in the capitalist mode. But yeah, Anitra, I think there's some more questions down here that are relevant for you. Kit Scott has asked, I'm curious how the unconditional autonomy allowance links or differs from a universal income. I don't know if any of us actually mentioned an unconditional autonomy allowance.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, you did? I missed it because I always think of UBI. So Anitra, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, it's because it's linked, for instance, with a maximum income. So in our...
Oh, you wrote the answer. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, we've proposed a maximum income that would be no more than 4 times the minimum income, and anyway at the end would converge. It also is different in the sense that it's not a monetary income, or not necessarily a monetary income, and will involve basic services and basic goods as its main components. So a guaranteed minimum income is something that you could plonk within our current system right here and now, but the unconditional autonomy allowance is related very much to an autonomous kind of productive system over which people are governing. So anyway, the 5th chapter in our book is about that, and unpacking it in terms of open relocalization and everything else.
Excellent. Thank you, Anitra. Mark Spain has asked, Anitra, in your experience, what is the optimal size and configuration of the social units for human beings to collaborate in the way that you describe?
Yes, the answer to that is it depends on the specific sort of land that you're looking at. So it's really related to the carrying capacity of the land, but within that, around 100 is a very good minimum unit. And what you would expect is that you would have lots of neighborhoods of 100 people, and they could be cells of something that's bigger. Hans Widmer, for instance, argues 500 is better. So, this is all up for grabs, but those are a couple of stabs in the dark. I think Nick Rose has got a raised hand as well.
Oh, sorry, Nick. He was doing all the correct procedure. I always just read the chats. Nick, do you have a question, my dear?
I do, thank you. I was just typing out I was typing it into the chat, but I'll speak to it now. So yeah, first of all, thanks very much. Yeah, great to have this discussion, so important and so timely at a time when the global economy is going into pretty profound crisis, and the political situation has just been an extraordinary year, I think, and I don't think there's any doubt that we're in a kind of moment of systemic and structural crisis, and that's a time of opportunity for alternatives to be proposed and debated and discussed and argued for. And I think degrowth has got absolutely so much to commend it and recommend it, particularly in kind of overproducing, over-consuming societies such as Australia. So completely kind of agree with and endorse everything that's been said tonight. I guess my question really sort of concerns, and maybe it's a question for Anitra, but also for Anna, I think, in terms of the the movement in Europe. And it goes to kind of the question of the politics of degrowth, and this question of resistance and agendas and transformative political projects, and how that's actually kind of taken forward and articulated in practice when You know, if you want to kind of go a little bit deep, I mean, capitalism has been sort of like touched on a few different times in the course of the discussion this evening. I don't think there's any doubt, if you're proposing a degrowth political agenda and economic agenda, that you're really tackling capitalism head on, in the sense that capitalism by definition is an expansionary economic system. It has to grow, otherwise it falls into crisis, and it, you know, has horrendous kind of like social and economic consequences, which, you know, we're seeing right now. And when it goes into deep crisis, then it, you know, tends politically towards fascism and repression, authoritarianism, which is exactly what we're seeing right now as we're speaking in the United States. You know, the veneer and mask of civility and democracy and political rights kind of quickly disappears, and the, you know, the iron fist of repression and rubber bullets and tear gas is, you know, coming out very literally. So, and even before then, you know, with COVID, you know, my work is in around food and food systems. You know, people are being sent back to work in the United States in particular in very dangerous situations, literally, you know, being sacrificed on the altar of profit in meatpacking factories, and, you know, without proper equipment, you know, healthcare workers not having proper equipment. I mean, capitalism made no preparation for this pandemic whatsoever. So I guess, you know, that's all kind of my preface to my question, which is, what is the actual politics of degrowth when it comes to the confrontation of a system that, you know, as Canadian Professor John McMurtry said 20 years ago, is in its cancer stage. You know, we're now in the cancer stage of capitalism, a metastasizing, life-destroying economic system that's, you know, obliterating human and ecological communities around the planet. What does degrowth as a movement have to say about that? And I guess what I haven't heard tonight is, you know, the class dimension of this, I guess from a Marxist perspective, in looking that there, you know, there are clearly class interests in society. There's extraordinary and grotesque inequality at this point in time. The global economy is very much structured to sucking all the wealth from most of us as working people up to a tiny fraction of the elite. Are we going to turn that around through, you know, permaculture communities and local food and co-housing, or do we need to be working with the trade union movement, working with the Black movement in America, with people who are actually taking this head on, and, you know, working with the levers to bring the system to a grinding halt, which ultimately will involve confrontational class-based politics in the form of, you know, massive worker organising and strikes and so on.
Thank you, Nick, for a very comprehensive question and statement. Anitra, did you want to speak to that, and then we'll turn to Anna?
Yeah, well, one of the frameworks that degrowth has used has been to refer to, in the decades that it's been a strong movement, as an undeniable capitalist collapse, which we're experiencing now. And the argument is that we either manage this, or then we have the kinds of consequences that you're talking about in the United States. So that's capitalist collapse, what we're seeing in the United States. What degrowth is about, it's about us recovering our capacity of democratic skills to be talking like we are tonight, and to organise, our capacity to organise, you know, which is, this is where you come to the class aspect of it. So many of us have been just pushed into an apathetic or really difficult position where we have very little say at all in terms of politics in the kind of system that we're in. We might vote once every 4 years amongst this very, very tiny choice when you look at it in terms of variety. So when you're looking at, well, how do you actually, how do you approach what is still a very strong system, even though it's collapsing around us? A lot of my work has actually been as a non-market socialist, and we're looking at actually saying we won't operate with money. And that actually puts capitalists and capitalism into a really difficult position, because we're not engaging with it. It's not, and it can't engage with us. It can't compete with us. But these are big questions. And in our book, it's exactly that kind of politics, which absorbs a lot of the discussion, and coming at it from a whole series of layers, like looking at John Holloway's going for power with rather than power over, and all kinds of things like that, which people are playing with in Australia, in the United States, and in Europe, when they're actually, you know, in Occupy movement or Extinction Rebellion. So there are a lot of crossovers there, and it's massive. In terms of the trade union movement, we've got various kind of passages in our book about this. There's a problem in as much as the trade union movement, as you know, from a Marxist point of view, can be really debilitating, because it actually relies on the capitalist system to advance and progress a bigger piece of the pie for workers. But in as much as unionists actually recognise that they want to be moving beyond capitalism, and they're working, for instance, with just transition and cutting the working week, we can work together.
Excellent. Thank you, Anitra. Anna, did you have any comments about the kind of political movement side of the degrowth?
Yeah, I totally agree with both Nick and Anitra. And just last weekend there was the Vienna Degrowth Conference. I don't know if some of you heard about it.
Yeah.
Which was mainly focused on strategies, because there is a recognition that among degrowth scholars and activists, we talk a bit too much about what is wrong, and still a bit too less about how are we going to, you know, build this alternative. And so this conference was dedicated just to it. I think there are a lot of also videos from the panels and so on online. One very interesting one for me was the one about trade unions. And they invited one leader of a trade union or a representative from Austria. And I found it very interesting that he said that, like, when we talk about we have to consume less, which is a key message in degrowth, he said this was a very much middle class, you know, enlightened middle class concern. So, and some people also took it a bit, I think, in a bad way, but I think he knows what he's talking about when, you know, he works with workers, right? He's a representative, so he knows what messages are aligned or not. But in that panel as well, one of things that I think we all agreed, and that it's been very much mentioned here today, is the need to work less, right? I think that's something most people would go for. It's like, okay, I can have more free time to do whatever else I want with my life, right? Either, you know, spending time with family, friends, engaging in community work, whatever. And I think that would be a very key demand that you could gather around. And because, yeah, I think from a degrowth perspective, while we have to communicate much more these already existing alternatives of living and so on, but we have to push for the political change. Like, this is a niche thing, so we have to align with all these other movements for justice, right? With workers, I think, in my opinion, very much. And yeah, look for the key points where we all align, which is, I think everyone wants a better life, right? Or with dignity and, you know, access to health and education and mental health and community. And I think that's where we have to push for, yeah, very much, and organize around.
Thank you. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. There are two questions that I'm going to put together, and I hope that's okay to the folks who've posed them. One person said that he had mentioned this to you personally, Anitra, but wants to pose it to the group, which is, if we support degrowth, does that mean we stop innovation like new smartphones and groovy things like that? Those are my words, not his, groovy. And someone else is saying, well, what about the health sector? which is responsible for extending our lives. You know, if we move away from money, we move away to other things, we'll be able to support health. Before I invite you to answer it, I guess I would like to say that particularly in the work we do around ecological limits and bioregional approaches to being healthy human beings in a healthy ecology, it comes down to choices. You know, there is so much excess stuff made and produced on this planet. And as a parent, I've seen oceans of plastic toys in toy shops. I've seen many other things. I think a society that understands its limits, understands the actual real resources it has available to it over time, forever, through circular economy, through donut economics, should then be able to make wise choices about, I love my smartphone too, but maybe rather than constantly upgrading the hardware, we could just have clever buggers playing with the software, and we agree that we keep the hardware for a certain amount longer than whatever, that's planned obsolescence. So I think rather than thinking of it as an act of deprivation or going backwards, what most people would argue is that degrowth is a way of going forward, because right now we're producing too much, we're using up too much of the earth, but we're still seeing escalating injustice and inequality. So this often, a lot of the numbers I've seen kind of pulled together around circular economy and degrowth is you could actually have everybody having a better life by extracting and using and polluting less, because most of what we're actually extracting and polluting, a lot of that is turning into waste and wealth for people who are already wealthy. But Anitra, Anna, do you have any thoughts about that kind of idea around how do we keep the things we like and how do we stay healthy in a degrowth moment?
I can say something very quickly. One is that I don't think that degrowth is for, I mean, we tend to go for low technologies or simple technologies because they're actually more effective. We would not preclude any kind of like high or complex technology. It's the issue is it appropriate in terms of materials, energy, and for human beings? The other thing in terms of the health, be very interesting in terms of pandemic, United States, United Kingdom, France, all those places with all the, where all the companies are that produce pills and wonderful hospitals and this, that, and the other, and what's actually happened. Health is a very complex area, and it's not necessarily directly related to the market. It's been underpinned by a lot of public monies and stuff like that. So it's actually a poor example of, market versus degrowth or whatever. So we'd be looking at prevention. I actually suffered from micromercurialism, and, like for years, no one knew what was wrong with me. And from my point of view, for instance, and I've met lots of people in immunology clinics and everything who've all got kinds of diseases, and people can tell there's something wrong with them, but that current system actually doesn't meet their needs. But we don't discuss that. It's all suppressed. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we're coming up to 3 minutes left for our hour and a half. Well done, everyone who's been able to stick it out in the evening and be part of this. There's a couple of comments, but I might grab the question that I think is an interesting one for the new economy space. Someone, and I'm sorry, it's further up and I've forgotten the name, but someone has asked, how does the Green New Deal connect with degrowth? How does it all fit together or not? I can speak.
Anna might like to talk about that.
Anna, did you want to? I can make some comments. Yeah.
Just very briefly, I think there are many Green New Deals being proposed, right? From the European Union Commission to in Europe, there is also this Green New Deal for Europe people, which are, quite different. So you would have to look into it. But I think, of course, you see that what is being proposed by the establishment is something that is not really challenging fossil fuel companies and really putting forward the shift in economic, industries and so on that are needed for an actual green transition. So while I think in the US they are much more highlighting the importance of justice, right, and of using the Green New Deal to for to have also fair wages and put a lot of people at work within regenerating ecosystems and care work. So I think in my perspective, but this is a big discussion, it would be compatible with degrowth if we use it not to recharge economic growth, but to shift the economy to be much more based on non-material work, which is really what is most valuable, right? We need, I mean, in its essence, to take care of each other, to take care of the earth, to have basic, food and so on. And even, for the agricultural system to be more sustainable, you would need more people working on it. So I think it would be possible to align it, but yeah, you have to look into the details.
That's great, Anna, and I agree. A good Green New Deal approach should be completely compatible with degrowth and then steady state or donut economics. But look, we're just about out of time. There's so many important issues to be discussed, and certainly here at NENA, we're trying to do our best to bring people together without exhausting us all too much to have these wonderful conversations. I'm going to thank our speakers and then give you a quick reminder about 2 more things coming up on the NENA horizon. But I've taken to this really daggy applause mechanism on Zoom, which is kind of clapping up here quietly. But I'd really like to thank Anitra and Anna for your wonderful wisdom and expertise tonight. Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. So a little bit of clapping. Thank you. Thank you. And very quickly, next, for those who would like to stay on board with the NENA Happy Boat and talk about how do we build this civil society strategy for a new economy, our next meeting, and we've had anywhere from 45 to 65 people, but we do have a chat about what we're up to, some examples from different hubs in NENA about some suggestions. It's on next week, our next meeting, Tuesday the 9th of June at 6 p.m. And if you go on the NENA website, you'll see the strategy button, the little thingy, the box on the homepage, and you click on that, see the web link for the strategy meeting. And I'm excited to say that later this month, we're going to have the Northern Territory is activating its hub. And on the 25th of June at lunchtime, they've got some amazing speakers lined up about rethinking economies for Northern Australia. So keep an eye on the Facebook page and our NENA website. I've got to update the webinar page. I'm sorry, it shows none of this goodness, but it will be there. And the recording from tonight will be available in a few days on the NENA website on the webinar page. And on that note, thank you all. It's been lovely evening with you. And I hope you have a lovely, lovely winter night, or wherever you are, Anna, it might be warm. Thank you so much for joining us early in the morning over there. We really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
11 o'clock, so it's fine.
Thank you. And good luck with all your other degrowth, happiness and events. So yeah, thank you, Anitra. Thank you, Anna. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.